You're listening to Science and Saucery, a show dedicated to adding life to your years. And now your hosts, registered dietitian Juliana Hever and scientist Ray Cronice.
Welcome.
Hello, hello.
It's a beautiful day out today.
It is indeed.
Loved last week's show.
I know.
I love our hydroponic garden.
It's a whole lot of fresh deliciousness, if you ask me.
I hope that more people jump in and feedback so that we can create a group of plant growers out in our audience.
I mean, it's like all about sustainability and efficacy and efficiency. All of that happens.
For me, it's just about delicious food.
Well, yeah, but it's all like a win-win-win.
Right.
You could make your own delicious food.
And I think this week we can continue on in our discussion about having food, you know, with the shutdown that has happened and people thinking about food and worrying about toilet paper and lots of other stuff. We'll probably focus in on the more positive side of this because I'm the eternal optimist. And this really gives us a unprecedented opportunity to look at food in a different way, because many people will often jump to the conclusion that by eating plant-based, somehow it's more difficult to eat.
I wonder if that has evolved in the last month or so now because of the availability of food and the scarcity of some of the other foods. And I'm wondering if people, now that they're more inclined or inspired or kind of forced into having to cook and prepare food and to do it at least more often, you know, and for more people, and there's just all sorts of different things happening. I wonder if there has been kind of an evolution of thinking about it and like seeing how, wow, these are really great staple foods. They're shelf stable, a lot of them, you know, and well, I'm talking about like the whole grains and legumes and all that stuff that you could always have on hand. And I'm wondering if people have found ways to use them. I'm hoping we've written some posts about trying to, you know, share recipes, or it can be so easy. And you just have to get used to it like anything else.
I hope attitude shift happens.
Shift
happens. But yeah, and when I was thinking about this, probably a week or so ago, I was thinking about this idea that when people discuss it being difficult to eat plant-based, and thinking and reflecting with what happens as our clients have that transformation process, it may be that the most important resistance is the shift from eating out and restaurants or takeout or delivery and preparing food. In other words, if you go back 5, 10, 15, 20, or 30 years, what you'll find is that less and less restaurants catered to a plant-based diet. I mean, they had side dishes, but they were side dishes with lots of salt or butter or some of the other things that people want to cut out, or oil. And so one of the things that people are hesitant about, I believe, is just because they're not cooking often at home. Like they cook for a holiday during a cookout, they grill, they may occasionally bake a cake or do something special. But the idea that most people cook every single day, at least probably 2 or 3 days a week, but we know friends in the city that eat out every single day.
Every single meal. I think there's definitely that element. And obviously the restaurants have, you know, changed and there are more options, but not necessarily healthy ones. But I think from what I've seen with the people I've worked with and we've worked with, that the biggest stress, the biggest obstacle is just shifting how you think about the plate. And I always say that it's like we're so used to seeing a certain thing. And when I was, you know, when I was raised and when I went off on my own and got married and was, you know, doing my personal training thing, and I had to prepare my, you know, chicken breasts and egg whites every day. And I just had a way of looking at food, and this is healthy and this is what I'm supposed to eat. And you get into a routine, and I know what I have to pick up at the store, and I know when I have to prepare and how long it'll last in the fridge. And it's like very comfortable. That's just how I learned and I practiced and I knew, and I was raised around it. So it was just how I saw food preparation. It's what you just know. And going to a plant-based diet is like, wait, what? Like no meat at the center, no chicken breast, no egg whites, no omelets, like all the stuff that you were taught to make and you were used to making, you were used to, has kind of like been taken away. And we always joke it's 7 ingredients really,
right.
But it's a dramatic shift in your thinking. And I always say, and I'll say this again because it's so important, it is like learning a new language. There is a transition period. There is a time where it's uncomfortable because you have to rethink it and you have to plan and it's like you can't just go on autopilot. You have to go back into your brain and go, okay, wait, what am I going to eat? How am I going to feed my kids? And then add just the practical part of it and the food deliciousness part of it. Add the whole layer of, what about all my nutrition? Where am I going to get this? And what about that? Because, the meat represents where you get your protein and your iron and all that. And then if you have to think outside of that, there's a lot of concern about, well, how do I make this well-rounded and adequate and enough, especially if you're feeding a family, it's not just you. So there's so many things. And then the carb, protein, fat, macro confusion adds a whole other layer. I don't want to eat too many carbs. Like all that stuff really adds, like it's so multidimensional to make this transformation, this transition to thinking this way. Because once you're over that hump, it's just, again, now we're on autopilot. Now we know this is not a big deal at all.
Yeah, food has not been a big deal to us. And it's not just that in Huntsville that food was available. We never really had a shortage at all in terms of vegetables. But even if we did, we were 2 weeks away at best from having food in our backyard. So we not only that, and I'm not saying that everybody needs to grow your own, but what I am saying is that in terms of the crisis, it's not like I'm going to work and slave for hours and hours and hours to grow that food. I spent an hour and a half the other day. I'll go out there once to add a little bit of water at one point, maybe, because it'll probably last until, what point when you come back, we'll end up having a huge harvest of kale. It's cool right now.
Yay.
So the kale grows like crazy. Chard grows like crazy. The butter crunch will grow like crazy. So why I'm saying this is that if you take those greens away, which to us normally would be the Costco/Sam's multi-pack of romaine heads, that we go through those every week, or the bags of the sort of a cruciferous vegetable mix that you get just to make it easy.
Yes.
But all of that could easily be replaced like we do with the romaine. Everything, you have a couple of heads of cabbage, and you can shred some cabbage and put it in there. Brussels sprouts, I think that's one of the things in there. Kale is one of the things in there. My point is that, okay, but those are just greens. And in a situation where food is in short order, this gets back to our point and where I think most dietitians fail. We saw one of the RDs comment on a post last week or whenever it was. And one of the places they fail is this idea that nutrition's an emergency. I mean, if you are overweight at all, or even if you're at a normal fat level, but if you're really, really thin, obviously you have a short time period. But at a normal level of adiposity plus, which is what most people are, many people walking around have months of stored energy. And why I bring this up is not in any way to condemn that, but to say that's exactly what that adaptive evolutionary trait is for.
Right. We never thought we would ever have to face this. And I don't think we really do now either.
Right.
But the idea of it is really interesting. And I think instead of it being like, to me, it's empowering. It's like, okay, I'm going to be okay if I skip a meal. Like that is empowering and makes me feel more calm about it. Like, I've seen people panicking, like we're going to starve before we die of this disease. I actually just saw that in my neighborhood. I was like, oh my gosh, like that's a horrible thought to have. That's so scary.
For me, I can't even imagine this mindset, just like I couldn't imagine eating a plant-based diet or exclusively plant-based diet. I couldn't imagine eating that way when I first started. And I've said on many podcasts in the past that first 2 months were really kind of sucked for me. Not because I wasn't familiar with vegetables, because I grew up on a produce farm. So it's not like I hadn't.
And you're an amazing cook. You've always been an amazing
cook. And my
cook.
mom loves to cook vegetables. So this has not been the thing. Both of my grandmothers were amazing cooks as well. It's not because I was veg phobic or that I didn't have a familiarity. It was just some weird habit or shift, like you were saying earlier, a change. And it took me a while to recenter and for this to become the new normal. And what's really interesting, I think, further beyond that is, for me, I mean, I always have probably at a minimum 5 or 10 pounds of rice at the house. It's easy to pick up a 20-pound bag of rice or a 25-pound bag of rice. For a lot of people, they would say, oh, rice, it's this white carb, or brown rice even, or whatever.
You'll give yourself diabetes.
You'll give yourself diabetes. And, I have repeatedly reversed my insulin resistance eating
specifically
exclusively
with rice
so
and potatoes.
I know that that's not true. It's just not true. But I'm obviously someone's listening right now going, what? But we're not going to go detail into that at the moment. But what I will say is that when you think about this, even if we go so let's just envision for a minute that stuff really gets bad or really was extreme, where food really became in short order in terms of a period of time. And if you look at this and say, okay, there's a week, there's a month, there's 2 months, there's 6 months, in terms of what someone needs to have on hand or how long, well, first of all, dry beans and dry rice and even pasta, these things have like a 10 to 15 year shelf life. Just think about that for a sec. I think white rice has a slightly bigger shelf life than brown rice. But what's really amazing is that that's a long time. That's a long time to have that. And so, I looked up several other things. Nutritional yeast was something like 2 years.
That doesn't last very long in my place.
but oats are there. You can freeze tofu for about 5 months, if you want to do that. So you can do that. So there's lots of things that you can do. Nuts and seeds, if you put them in the freezer, they go from about a year to 2 years. So when we look at this, there's really 2 elements of eating. Actually, there are 3 elements of eating. And I think if you conflate those 3, it becomes way more complicated. And those 3 elements are, the first thing is meeting your calorie needs. So I would say at the very fundamental level, getting enough calories is something people would worry about, and we'll come back to that. I think at the second level is the nutritional needs, nutritional adequacy, right? And we can address that in what we think in terms of the health span perspective. And then the third is the socioeconomic needs, the social pressures. Like there's this whole social thing with eating. And as important as that may be in day-to-day living, it's really not that important for survival. So we can let's just push the social thing out. And why that's important is because it doesn't matter if your survival is because the stores are out of something, or food is being scarce, or you're stranded somewhere, etc. It can also mean you really need to stop eating because you have enough stored away right now, and you're now causing yourself chronic disease from the excess food in your diet.
Not only that, which was so interesting that kind of was elucidated in the last couple of weeks, is that there's this increased morbidity, I think, or mortality with the coronavirus. Or I don't know if it's more risk. I actually have to look, either more risk or more risk of severe.
Right, but without even getting into the details and tying this to that situation, I want us to all talk and get that out of everybody's mind right now. I want to talk about this from a more practical level of reimagining food and reimagine your plate. It's not that it's unimportant. It's just that once we start conflating these stories, then everybody starts having all of these kinds of thoughts and reactions. And I really want to focus everybody on this simple thing, which is you're eating for social reasons, and that's absolutely the majority of reason most people pick up their fork. They may think they're hungry, but really that's not what's driving them. They may think they need this nutrition, but that's not really what's driving them. What's really driving them is it's time to eat, and there's some kind of social thing going on, or there's some kind of routine, there's some kind of food. All food is habit. And when I changed from one set of diet, or when you change from one set of diet to another, those habits change. But that second reason, which is nutritional adequacy, this is where I think most RDs, and I'm going to say most RDs, don't get it. They don't get it only because they were taught the deficiency model.
100%. I mean, we always talk about how the DRIs are, you don't need to get the exact 100% of every nutrient every single day. That is just not even
right. And it's so easy to prove by a person with a 382-day water-only fast with a multivitamin, right? Or me, 24 days or 14 days, or all the people at True North. I'm not saying that everybody should aim to do this. What I'm saying is...
Not to mention that just eating more, like if you just eat enough, quote unquote, like you're just eating more food, doesn't even mean you're going to get a perfect nutrition profile.
Right. And they're not worried about the nutritional adequacy when people are running through for whatever burgers at Burger King or whatever. They don't, nobody, or when they're eating pizza or when they're eating takeout Chinese or whatever they're doing. So what I'm saying is that the body is surprisingly resilient. I mean, it can survive on a lot of things. It may not thrive on everything, but when we look at this idea of nutrient adequacy, clearly the educational underpinning of nutrition is all based on deficiency eating, which 100 years ago, a century ago, mattered because food was economically scarce. And people are overweight today because food is economically plentiful. It's access to food that's driving obesity, not genetics, not willpower, not any of that. We are beings that evolved coping mechanisms in a calorie-scarce world. And appetite is one of those coping mechanisms. And it's not surprising that people have an appetite and don't have an off switch. But what was different in the world that we evolved in, and we see it right here in the backyard with the birds and the squirrels and the chipmunks and the rabbits and all those things, is calories are scarce. And right now it's spring and calories are starting to, they track the photo period. The sun is out more, meaning more green, more things growing. And then it just goes all the way down, rolls all the way downhill to humans in terms of caloric concentration. So this idea that nutrition is a daily or hourly emergency is really crazy. And when you see people, especially in the fitness world.
Yeah, I was going to say in the gym,
it could be, I can't say this for sure, but it could be a lot of people in fitness are unintentionally driving chronic overnutrition.
Absolutely.
And don't even know it.
I mean, how many times forget trainers, but like dietitians that say, if you're not losing weight or if you're whatever, you need to eat more. You're not eating often enough. You're not eating enough. Like that doesn't even make sense from a basic physics perspective.
Right.
But yeah, the gym, I definitely fuels it because it's like more protein. You slug those shakes. Make sure you're having one before your workout, after your workout. It is designed. It's almost designed. All of the programs are about fueling, recovering, and eating more. And it definitely drives that.
Right. And so, we come down to that third level of caloric need. So that's what you just touched on about eating more to lose, Let's just stop and talk about this. And we always talk about our metabolic bank account. Now, when you're out writing a check in your bank account, does it matter how much money you deposited today? Well, if your bank account is zero, it matters a lot because maybe you don't have enough in the checking account to cover the check. But if the balance is huge, it doesn't matter how much money you wrote the check. You just can't exceed the balance. This idea that we compare calories in and calories out on the same day is just a convenient assertion and reflects nothing about our biology. Now stop and think about that. There couldn't be anything that is more tried and true when we're talking about calories than all the people out there saying, I'm comparing calories in and calories out on any given day and ignoring the account balance. I'm just talking about energy. I'm not talking about nutrition. Nutrition's a separate issue. So now do you see when we end up conflating this? There is this social issue. There is this nutritional underpinning. And there is this caloric thing. And when we break it down in those three ways and say, okay, those are all real issues that we have to address. But when we conflate them, it's a wholly different problem. And I will submit that the fact that someone can water fast for 382 days or even 24, that proves unequivocally that calories in and calories out on every day is not the salient decision point. And why is that important for everybody to get in their head right now? Especially if you've really studied this at a great level and you can't reconcile that fact, because that's the real world. You can say whatever you want. And obviously, I have a lot of these debates online and other places with people who've never measured a metabolism. I've measured mine hundreds of times in lots of different situations. And doing that just gives you a clarity like you can't imagine, because, I mean, you feel confident because you know the person over there simply read this narrative, and they may have read it from credible sources, but throughout time, there's been assumptions that are made for all of these rules of thumb that people have. There are underlying assumptions, and if you're outside the bounding box of the underlying assumption, the rules of thumb fall. But right now, what are we doing? In all three of these categories, we are carrying rules from over a century ago when food was economically scarce, and you didn't see as many overweight people. There was some time in the Victorian age it was popular, but it was mainly the wealthy,
the royalty,
right?
Yeah.
But today, obesity is a symptom of poverty. Everyone needs to stop and think that our environment changed, and it's not just a univariate model of, oh, well, food is not as nutritious or empty calories, etc. Forget that. Right now, if you just stop and say, okay, what if food really wasn't available for the next month from any store? What would I eat? Well, first, I could not eat for 24 days and I would be okay. I would be just fine. I know that confidently, and no one can prove me wrong on this because I've actually done it.
Well, that's the thing, is that most of us have not, and it's terrifying to think about if you have not. It's hard to picture that, especially if you haven't thought about it or read the studies about it. It's terrifying.
Okay,
to think
but tell me why any healthcare professional, any physician, any nurse, or any dietitian should have a pause on that. You know, why should they not understand that? How do you get out of medical school? How do you become an RD without understanding a basic element of human and animal survival?
Because you said that right at the beginning of this, is that we are taught based on a deficiency model. Everything is surrounding deficiency and avoiding deficiency at all costs, as if that's going to be the number one thing.
Excess is best.
Yeah, I mean, no, but literally, that's exactly what it is. If your bedridden patients are being force-fed tons of calorie just to keep food going through them, and you know, that's not necessarily a good idea. You know,
Right.
If you think about animals in nature, when they're sick, they go off and they don't eat. You know, they go
lose
off.
their appetite.
Yeah, they lose their appetite. We lose our appetite too, but we're still forced to eat.
Yeah, we force feed our sick.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, if you
Chicken
think about that, that's
soup,
crazy.
You got to have some chicken soup, have some clear soda, just
whatever
get something
you can,
in
just
there.
get something down,
Right.
something down.
And
it's like,
again,
what?
if people were at the edge of economic survival of food a century ago and they were very lean and they weren't carrying around this excessive bank account, metabolic bank account, then probably this is not a bad approach. But what I'm asking is a more fundamental question that I think everyone listening should stop and think about. Wouldn't you expect that every healthcare professional, any person that's dealing with food or intake, should understand the basic physiology of human survival, hours, days, weeks, months, and even years? And the fact that I can say that ought to make everybody's antenna go up of no food. We have these answers. They're not hard to find if you go look, and yet we don't teach it. And then we have people saying ridiculous things. And so when we look at our energy storage organ, our adipose tissue, and then our glycogen in our liver and in our muscles and extremities. Okay, that's our energy storage organ. We have glucose stored, we have lipids stored. Okay, we have that. But if you look at it and think about what someone says, and they say it with such confidence, you know, you got to eat to lose.
Right.
You know, you got to eat to stoke your metabolism. So what they're saying is that this energy storage organ that we have for times of no food, because we evolved in a calorie scarce world, along with potatoes, plants that also evolved in a calorie scarce world, and they store energy in their energy storage organ called tubers. They're underground storage organs, right? When we look at underground storage organs, we have tubers, we have bulbs, we have rhizomes, and we have corms. Corms are like water chestnuts. So when we look at the family of underground storage organs that have starchy material, glucose stored in there, that's what it is. It's for times when light is gone, photosynthesis can't provide the main energy, and the plant lives off of that stored energy to grow again in the spring. We see that going on. Bulbs are among the first things that pop out of the ground, right? So that's kind of an interesting fact. On the other hand, those squirrels and some of these other larger mammals, they store it as fat. So this concept that you must eat the storage organ of another plant or animal to burn your own storage organ is just made up. It's made up. And then again, made up by who? It's made up by people who haven't stopped to really think about it. Because here's what they will do. They will go to that next step and say, well, when you eat, does your metabolism go up? And I would say, yes, it does. And they would argue, well, see, your metabolism is higher. And if your metabolism higher, you're burning more food. And then I would say, no. The real question you should be asking next is, why does my metabolism go up? What causes it to go up? And what we explain very clearly in Oxidative Priority paper, and what I've measured hundreds of times, and I'm not even the person that came up. I mean, it's been going for a century. When you eat, your metabolism goes up because your body is essentially liberating a lot of these excess calories, like alcohol, like glucose, like amino acids from proteins that you can't store. If you can't store it, the idea that every extra calorie you eat gets stored as fat, this is a crazy idea too. And I've said this, if you gain 50 pounds over 20 years, that is a thermodynamic calorie equivalent of an extra 168 calories a week. A week!
That's so mind-blowing.
Nobody guesses their diet to that level.
No.
So see, with just rudimentary tests about the world around you and how you're viewing things, if someone's just talking and they're not thinking and they're not stopping to reflect on this, it's so easy to say, oh, of course, you got to stoke your metabolism. You stoke your metabolism, you eat more food, and then you're going to be burning more fat. It sounds good. But again, it doesn't pass the test of what is really going on in biology. And so it's clear to me, because I see it with our clients every single day. I mean, no one can push me off this position at this point, because all measurements, everything that I've read, point to exactly the same thing. There are no contradictions in the worldview that says that when you're deficient in calorie intake, your body utilizes your energy storage organ. Doesn't use your brain, doesn't use your liver, doesn't use your muscle tissue. It uses your energy storage organ. That's what it does, because that's why it's there. And our energy storage organ is extra large because access to food is unimaginably easy. So now bringing this back to this whole, sort of plant prepper attitude about, what do you do with plant foods when we think about not just how do we plan for some kind of crisis or emergency, it's really not that difficult when you now take off all these reins. So, I don't have to eat every day if I didn't want to. I don't need to worry about all of this nutrition every single day if I didn't need to, especially if there was a crisis. It would be just, again, getting enough calorie. But getting enough calorie doesn't start with the input. Getting enough calorie says, when I wake up every day, if I'm going to burn, and that's what our clients do, 0.6 to 0.8 pounds of fat a day on average, it's like 2/3 of a 16-inch cheese pizza before I take my first bite. And you say, yeah, but that's internal energy. Yes. Where did that internal energy come from? You don't photosynthesize it. You ate all those meals. You've already had those meals. So this extra body fat is meals we can use during times when resources are low. Now, the difference between fasting and a water-only fast and eating less of these other kinds of foods really is about keeping your digestive tract moving, keeping bowel movements going, keeping a healthy bowel, that sort of thing. So I'm not suggesting that people have to go with water fasts. I'm just saying, why can't people who have been trained specifically in nutritional adequacy not have this concept in their head and in their framework and in their worldview that these calories can be stored for extended period of time?
Yeah, no, because again, we don't know that. I mean, I really learned that after working with you, and that's after 7 years of graduate school, studying this stuff specifically, because we don't look back at all those original books and studies and showing all that. That never came up. It's crazy. I mean, it's really crazy to think about. What also is very interesting, like from our clients' perspective, is that what we all kind of find out is how little we can get away with eating. Because that's like, that's usually the first time people do that is when, our clients that are losing weight and they're faced with having to like look at this every single day and see how much they eat and how much they lose and all of that. It is, I think every single person we've worked with has said the same thing. Like they can't believe how little food they need, and they still have all the energy because their energy doesn't come from their food directly. And there's like some shocking, mind-blowing lessons that take place when we encourage them to do this, because that's not what we thought. We thought if you don't eat, you have no energy, and how are you going to survive? I mean, that is quite literally the narrative that is taught with science to back it up in school.
Right. And even as you're saying this, even though I've repeated exactly what you've said, hundreds of times, it's really interesting. I'm hearing it in a new way in the context of our discussion today, which is, it's true. You just don't need to eat when you have stored energy. And really the fascination should be is we really probably should be expressing, isn't it amazing how well our body utilizes this stored energy and how good I feel even in the absence of eating every day.
Well, and look at what's happening in terms of this huge, explosion of intermittent fasting ideas that are coming out. And, we talked with David Sinclair about xenohormesis and all that stuff. All of this slight stress on the body is actually beneficial.
Right.
And we're seeing improvements in chronic diseases and improvements in health span and longevity just by eating less. Yeah. Like that just shakes everything off the rocker.
Yeah,
we
just had another client that, boom, blood pressures are down low again,
yep.
And coming off medications.
Results are typical.
And so, when we get back to this, and now let's sort of maybe, I'll wrap up those 3 columns one more time for everybody, because it's a concept you and I have thought about a lot, but it's probably a concept that many people haven't sort of framed it this way. And that is that we have needs, social needs to eat, and those are real. You're not talking to the person. Just because I'm not afraid to go extended times without food doesn't mean that that's like my passion. I absolutely love to eat amazing food. We've traveled the world. I love food. So this is not a question of enjoyment. And the food we prepare, the food we eat in various countries, etc., it's decadent, and sometimes it's off the rail, unhealthy food. So it's not like we're a health nut coming out, only on double coupon Tuesday to have something decadent. We don't mind having those rare and appropriates. With that said, the social need to eat is something that everyone can stop and reflect on and realize that many times you're eating for reasons other than this underlying nutrition and calorie. So there's a lot of things. So it's something separate. That's my only point. The second thing is in terms of nutritional adequacy. There's no doubt that a balanced meal of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, that it's complete. It has what you need, and the few things that are limited or missing are easy to supplement. It's a really small list. There's no problem in limiting certain things in your diet as long as you supplement with them. This whole fallacy that, oh, it all has to be natural. I've built my diet so it's natural. What the heck does natural mean? Just thrown in there as a narrative. It's part of the overlaps with the social thing I just said, the story, the narrative people believe. But this nutritional adequacy, you can eat nutritionally adequate with or without animal products in your meal. What animal products really have an issue with is nutritional excess. And that's the part I think no one's really thinking about. It's not that the plant products are deficient. It's that a lot of the animal products are excessive. And when we compare this to the health span and longevity research of many organisms, it is dietary restriction without malnutrition that activates these stress and survival mechanisms that you were talking about earlier. And that's really probably what the problem is. Energy gets concentrated up the food chain. You're not going to get me to say that we aren't designed to eat meat or any kind of crazy, or we're designed to eat plants. I'm not going to say that. We are super survivors. We store energy really well. We're mobile. We got opposing thumbs. We got great eyesight in terms of being able to go track things down, whether it's a potato that's not running very fast,
or the food at Costco, which is like you just have to pull it off the shelf.
Yeah, so we have that. So the point is, we are unbelievable at engineering our environment to the point where we have an excess of food available. And then in that third category of calorie requirement, the calorie requirement, if you'll just make one change in your worldview, which is the checking book analogy, daily deposits really have nothing to do with your account balance and writing checks. And that is a much more accurate way of how our body works, because the concept behind DRIs is that if we can get a certain amount every day, we'll never really fall short. But the fact of the matter is, if one day you get a lot, there are certain nutrients that you can absorb a lot immediately, and there's other ones that you have a difficulty. B12 comes to mind, whether the B12 was, an injection or whether it was oral, and how old you are and what's your intrinsic factor and all these other issues. How much did you take because of the absorption curve? My point is that it's ridiculous to think that you need to get these DRIs. They're really targets, and they're targets with a really big bracket because everyone wants to err on overnutrition.
And interestingly, we suggest multivitamins, just because then you cover your bases and don't have to think about it, like when we're doing with our clients going through weight loss. But interestingly, there's all this research on multivitamins and they don't improve health. So like, even if you're sitting there chock full of all the nutrition that they say we need, that's not going to do anything for your chronic disease risk, your mortality risk. Like, the studies have never supported any benefit of having all nutrition all the time.
Well, what they've said is they're basically support once you overcome deficiency.
Right.
What really is that certain nutrition in excess becomes detrimental, but it may increase fecundity. It may increase reproduction. And so that kind of gets into a whole nother complexity that I want to not get to until we, again, wrap up these 3 points: social eating, nutritional eating, calorie eating. Those 3 things are 3 separate problems. They're related, they're interrelated, but as long as you see these things squashed all together, and that's, I think, for simplicity, that's what the USDA balance plate or pyramid was all about, squashing all these together. Now, let's talk about that. Well, USDA is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They're promoting agriculture. And, we even discussed this. If you read the opening chapter of the Health Span Solution in the history part, we even discussed this very specifically because Atwater even said it's way more economical to grow the food, grow the plants and feed it directly to the people than to feed it to the animal and feed the animal to the people. Now, he wasn't a vegan or a vegetarian, and it wasn't ideology, and we should be able to say that without someone invoking ideology. But at the same time, it's really amazing that everything that was being done back then was about promoting both agriculture as a business, because agriculture was big business. a century ago. It's still big business, but it's not cutting edge business. So at that point in time, the technology was the technology of horticulture, of animal husbandry, of disease and infectious disease treatment, of distribution of food. You know, we're talking about the advent of transportation and how much we could transport across the country. What was refrigeration? As refrigeration starts becoming something that we can do. So all of these things change the whole landscape of food access. And that's where they were. And then right alongside of that, the USDA, which is still to this day improving and working on those, promoting all kinds of agriculture, whether it's healthy or not, is irrelevant. And what we saw even with the McGovern report in 1977 was that just by saying red meat, I can't tell you how many times people say, well, I don't eat red meat.
Oh, everyone.
As if the color of it really matters.
Right.
If myoglobin is the issue.
Right, right.
I mean, and so... And I'm not to imply that a person can't have some animal products in their diet and probably be just fine. What I'm saying is the fact that really believe that this is this biological fact or this biological, nutritional fact, when in fact this is an example of social structure of food just by a report saying red meat and it being so viscerally knowable and easy to transmit and easy to communicate, et cetera, and it's spread. And look, I remember when I was a kid, pork was the other white meat. Mm-hmm. And you know what? They never succeeded at that advertising campaign. But somehow chicken came out ahead. And even egg whites came out ahead. So what ended up happening is the red became universally identifiable
as the bad food.
And it crashed the beef market then, right? So we see that. And so this is an example of the U.S. Department of Agriculture wanting to respond and saying, don't kill our stakeholders on this. And for the people that think McGovern...
No pun intended.
Yeah. Yeah. The people who
our
think,
holders.
that believes, McGovern was, from a grain state. Well, they haven't read carefully because what was really amazing about McGovern's grain state is that they actually used the grain to feed mostly to the livestock. So they had a huge livestock. He didn't get reelected because he killed their livestock industry that year too. So, this is even stuff that I'm way off topic, but I think it's interesting how you pull these threads and most people stop at that high level and then just never go down to the next level. And then we have all of this, what we would call macro confusion when it's macronutrients, but we have all this confusion. But again, the USDA is there to promote agriculture and they give these nutritional guidelines, and so this is really, we don't have a National Institute of Health for Nutrition, which we should.
Yes.
So it's just a separate body. Yes. But this idea that somehow nutrition's emergency, and we've talked about this over and over, it's really laughable. And it's laughable that I just am surprised that so many people that I know that are really smart people haven't taken the time to think carefully about this problem, even researchers in the field, because again, I think that socioeconomic element of this perturbates their lens and the way they look at the problem.
And, a month and a half ago, this was really more exaggerated and more like, wow, we could have food anytime, anywhere, all day long. Access is everywhere. We never saw that coming, that there was going to be any kind of change. And here we are. This literally did happen. It's happening right now, where there is that idea that was like, oh my gosh, what if our food supply is hampered? What if what if we're going to have a problem? And I think a lot of people are responding to that emotionally. Of course we are, because it's like never been part of our generation. All, the last, 50, 60 years, we've seen food and as whenever we wanted, how much we wanted. So that's what we've been talking about this for years. And here we are, where it's kind of like this, well, wait a second. Maybe it's not so crazy to think about survival right now. Maybe it's not so crazy to plan and think in that way, which we never saw coming.
Right. And what I feel really pleased about is absolutely nothing changed about the way you and I eat. Nothing really changed about the shopping other than the toilet paper that wasn't available for a while, but we had plenty of backup because I used to have it on auto replacement at Amazon, so that wasn't an issue. There was no change in the way we've eaten. In fact, we may have eaten a little bit more in the last week or two, but the point here is most people, I would say the vast majority of people out there, have increased fast food in their diet.
Mm-hmm.
I believe
you mean right now?
DoorDash and Uber Eats, I think the quality of their food has probably gone down.
I think so
not
too.
up.
But there's also this mentality of, screw it. Like what if I don't know what's going to happen next week? There
Right.
is that idea
And
of
again,
like,
that's the social part.
and there's this panic where it's like, I want to store more. I mean, I know that I've heard so many people say this, like there's this panic of, well, this is not the time to lose weight. This is not the time to think about that. Eat what you can. And
our clients are in such peace.
Well, that's the kind of funny thing is we had some clients start right at the beginning of this, and it was, they have to miss, or they get to miss, all of that crazy social pressure that most of our clients go through,
Right.
having to go on this program in the real world when it was normalized. And here we are where they're like at home. It's like so easy that we're going to have to work with them later when they get integrated back into society. It's fascinating.
I just think it's amazing that nothing changed about the way we eat. Nothing. And just by going out there and spending an hour planting the hydroponic, and if you haven't heard last week's episode on hydroponics, go back to that and go to our social media because there's some posts there. But the point here is I can't imagine it being any easier. And I hear all of these people panicked about food, and it doesn't even matter where you live. None of the food that we have here, other than the fresh greens, right? None of that would have been that difficult. So I'm going to go back. If we go back to the apartment in California, there is definitely more than a month's worth of food sitting there waiting in perfect harmony. Agreed? I'm not saying that you won't immediately grab a bunch of leafy greens, but that is a luxury, not a necessity. Right. So we've got to talk rationally, knowing what we know about science and nutrition, and know that at the apartment there is plenty of food. Plenty of food. Now, could we always make eggplant rollatini? Could we always make sriracha stuffed mushrooms? I'm not saying that there is enough food to pick up the HealthSpan solution and at any point prep any recipe in there. What I'm saying is, back to what food really is biologically, would you starve? And the answer is no, because first of all, we both have extra body fat. Right? Yes. So it's true. I mean, we're not obese, but we have extra body fat. So we got that. Secondly, in terms of nutrition, we both have plenty of supplements. We're not going to run out in a month. We have those, right? So we have those, but they could even be rationed if we had to, but we have those at both places. Third, there's plenty of food in the freezer and the pantry. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It'll be fun for you to count at some point when you get there, count, how many cans of beans you have, but I know there's a lot. And then that's not even including the dry stuff.
I think I'm going to go on a hummus diet when I go home.
There you go. So
hummus all the time.
So what we have here is it's just not that difficult. And since our palate isn't whatever Whoppers, our palate is rice and beans and corns and potatoes and greens, salads and wraps. We did, our kimchi rolls. Oh my gosh, they're so delicious. I mean, it's not so like we've been hurting at all. And we've been eating healthy, so that's not that. We're not really eating junk food at the moment. So where I'm going is that this is everyday life, and there was no change in what we had to do. And even if I were in any city that was hit the worst with the grocery store, it would not have made a difference, especially now, especially knowing this once. Right now, to anybody listening right now, if you had an issue during this period of time, one, you may not know how to cook, and I understand that. It would be a great thing to learn how to do that at home. Two, if you cooked more at home, you'd have more supplies on hand and know what to eat other than DoorDash, other than Uber Eats, other than going out to restaurants and other ones. And three, you could now, any person could now prepare, because what I didn't talk about earlier when we were talking about it is we also, because of one of our clients that was going on a camping trip, I started about 2 years ago with a place called Harmony House, and they have dried vegetables. And so they have everything: tomatoes, carrots, beets, corn, all kinds of stuff. In dried form, this is 5 years of shelf life for this stuff. And you can make, I've done this. You can make an amazing soup with those dried vegetables. You can make an amazing soup. They have everything. I bought this on Amazon. I bought a kit before this whole thing started because I just wanted to have a way to do meals on the go and have a way to think about it. But it's not hard to have food on hand, and no one should ever have that problem. And you don't have to go all plant prepper to do it. You don't have to be, it doesn't have to be to the point of it becoming yet another social food construct where, oh my gosh, at any minute, I'm going to run out. It doesn't have to be that. There can be this really simple harmony where you just simply say, okay, I'm fine. If you had a struggle because you're not used to cooking, well, then this is a really great time to start learning. And your health will benefit as well.
Don't forget, there's also this element of entertainment that was always part of our story. Like, we've always talked about that. And now, so when people are quote unquote bored, a lot of people are, struggling. Legitimately struggling. People I know and I'm close to are really struggling with not having their typical social worlds, and it's kind of collided for them. And so there's this entertainment that happens now where it's like, well, I'm going to eat because it feels good and it's comforting. And there is that whole element that a lot of people are facing in a different way now too. And that's always been the case. Food is always entertainment. There's always so much of that in our culture today, but it's a whole shift now where, people are cooking online, with, doing kind of social things, the holidays, Passover and Easter, and people are kind of congregating via Zoom to, be together. But there's still this interesting kind of shift in how we see the entertainment portion of food as well. And there's this deprivation feeling for a lot of people where they, they're kind of replacing it with food. Not that that's, what we can recommend, but it's definitely something that people do. It's a natural tendency to look for comfort and solace, and food seems to fill that for all of us at some level.
Yeah, I would say so, but it's more habit than it is biology.
Of course,
and
but all of our habits have shifted or have been forced into a unique situation.
Well, we can look at them objectively now, or more objectively. So, if your whole life is centered around going out to eat at different restaurants and meeting with people, you're probably also having health issues too. You just don't know about it yet, but you will have them because almost all restaurants cater to the masses in terms of the mass palate. And it's at best, a 5 or 6 on the health scale of, 10 was amazing and 0 was, awful. But most of them, I would say, are 5 or less, most meals. And I'm not saying not to eat these. I'm not saying that we don't go have those. But the difference is the vast majority of the meals we eat every day are 8 or 9 or 10 in terms of health. And for us, 9 or 10 in terms of the food experience, because we have habituated and love what we cook. So, and preparation, just preparing the meals is something we enjoy in an entertaining way. And that, again, this is a learned habit. It's not.
Yeah. And this is a great excuse right now. This is a great kind of inspiration because there is this beautiful part. Honestly, I would rather eat your food than any restaurant in the world. I just think your food is absolutely the best. It makes me so happy, and it feels like it was just infused with this passion, and it's like this delicious food. And I would rather eat your food any day, any meal, and it makes me very happy. And when I'm without you, when I'm striving to do that on my own too, it's like there's so much, you have to kind of focus on this. Okay, I'm gonna, if you're not comfortable just throwing things together like a lot of people aren't in the kitchen, I never was trained how to do this. this is a kind of a good opportunity to go, you know what, I'm going to try some new things. And it is, let's try to go and see what, like make a challenge of, I've got wild rice and 1 can of beans and all these herbs and spices. And what can I do with this? And kind of throwing it together and kind of seeing what you can come up with. And I always say, like, sometimes the best meals are made by accident. So go through your recipe books. A lot of us have collected tons of them. I have so many, I have dozens and dozens, hundreds of cookbooks at home. And, find something that has those ingredients that you have. Go online and search for those ingredients, and you could find some combinations, and then experiment and kind of, this is a kind of a fun way, a fun challenge to think about the situation and to get inspired a little bit. And maybe it'll make you love cooking even more. Or maybe it'll help you find some of your new favorite recipes, and it'll make it kind of part of your regular repertoire moving forward. But there's a lot we could all learn more. We could all learn more skills, and we could all learn more, ways to prepare food and how to do things. And this is an opportunity too, if you think about it like that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I believe that if people will reframe their worldview just a little bit and always sort of ask, again, not in a judgmental way and not in a, I'm being obsessing about food way, but just to know that your ideas about how this works are the result of decades sometimes of other people's thinking. You just accept it. And so
that's so true.
So it's not surprising that it might take a little bit of reflection, which an average person might say is obsessing about food. But the real obsession with food is the fact that everyone's panicked when it's not available. That's the real obsession. The real obsession isn't the fact that I know that I can exist without food for a while, or that we can do just fine on a plant-based diet. The real obsession is absolutely believing that something is mandatory. So, whenever someone says to me, oh, cheese, I couldn't give up cheese, I say, well, then you should.
You do.
Or wine or beer or meth. Whatever you think you can't give up no matter what, you should. Just because you don't really want to be owned by ingesting a substance in general. I mean, I have a phobia of addiction, so I know that some of that's unique. But when we really look at food, if you'll just try maybe this week, every single time you eat, think to yourself, okay, what's the social need I'm filling right now with this meal? And then what's the nutritional need that I believe I'm filling with this meal right now? And then what's the caloric need I'm filling with this meal right now? If you'll look at a few meals and a few days, or even better, sometimes it's easier to judge the person shopping cart in front of you instead of looking at your own, because a lot of times we see other people's limits when we don't see our own limits. We just are blind to them because they feel like needs when they're wants. So just look at the people around you some. Think about some of the stories. Think about some of the things you see and are hear on Facebook, on Instagram posts, on Twitter. Just look at it and just use those 3 lenses. The first lens being the social need that's being fulfilled, the second lens being the nutritional lens, and the third lens being the caloric lens, and ask yourself which one is really driving that meal at this point. Because I've said it so many times before, but Jeffrey Rhodes, absolutely amazing question, sick individual, sick populations, that physicians have stopped asking, and I think dietitians probably don't ask it, and maybe even health coaches don't ask it. Why did this patient get this disease at this time? And I want to lift that a little bit and giving them full credit and say, so I'm going to lift that a little bit and ask the question about someone I'm observing in trying to understand, why is this person eating this meal at this time? And I believe that if you'll take that really calm approach to it and think about it, you'll recognize and see even in yourself that those 3 things don't need to be conflated, and that when you conflate them, the problem changes enormously. It becomes unimaginably complex.
And always it starts with awareness and just putting awareness and shining some light on what's going on.
Well, it starts with awareness, and today I think we'll end on awareness.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this leafy green path to good health.
It's always the food, so remember,
Keep eating right.
Thank you for listening to Science and Saucery. For more details about the content in today's show or to contact Juliana and Ray, please visit us at healthspansolution.com.
Welcome to the first day